Barb, let's look back. Think back to that decision 2 years ago. Fast forward to tonight. What has gone through your mind from then until now?
Well, you know, one of the things that the majority said in the Dobbs opinion is that finally we are going to take abortion out of the Supreme Court and send it back to the states where it belongs. And of course, we've seen nothing of the sort because it created the chaos that people predicted it would because of the lack of clarity. And so now we've got this patchwork of different states trying different laws, seeing what sticks, seeing what works. We've also seen 117,000 people travel to have abortions out of state in the past year. And so I think we're in this period of chaos that is not likely to subside anytime soon.
Josh, what about you? You were the person who broke the news that the court had voted to overturn Roe when the Dobbs decision leaked early. What are you thinking tonight? What were you thinking then?
Well, we were thinking this was going to be significant, Stephanie, but we never thought it would be as big as it turned out to be. And by that, I mean, the political impact really wasn't expected. And the reason for that was we'd seen so many other cases come and go from the Supreme Court on the issue of abortion. We'd seen predictions from Democratic activists, predictions from abortion rights activists, predictions from political analysts that, oh, this would be the one that would really bring people to the polls. And it never seemed to happen, especially the issue of bringing women to the polls. And then in the wake of this decision, first the disclosure in Politico a couple months early, and then the decision 2 years ago, we saw something we haven't seen before, which was a dramatic political upsurgence as a result of this, even in states really not known for progressiveness.
John, clearly the Democrats think this issue will help them in November. It did in the midterms. How does Trump's camp feel about it?
They're obviously very concerned about it, Steph. You've heard Donald Trump over the course of the last couple of years basically scold other Republicans for taking extreme positions, or what he views as extreme positions on abortion, particularly those who want to have bans that don't include exceptions in cases of rape, incest, or when the life of the mother is in danger. There's tremendous fear on Trump's side. You saw Joe Biden's clips there. For Democrats, they're looking at sort of three main points here. Number one, they can motivate their base. Number two, they absolutely have to make sure that voters understand that Donald Trump is responsible for the Supreme Court justices who made this decision. Not all voters understand that, and you can see from what Biden said that that's important to him. And the third thing there that's very important for them is trying to portray this as part of a larger extremism push by Donald Trump.
But, John, Donald Trump can't be that scared or worried about it. He's the one responsible for putting us here, and he takes credit for it every chance he can get. He's chosen to make white evangelicals his core base, and we know they're single-issue voters, and we know what that issue is, and so does he.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say that it wouldn't be the first time that Donald Trump had taken an action and taken it proudly and then learned that the consequences weren't exactly what he wanted. So, you know, I think that he is happy to say that he put this court in place. He's happy to let people interpret from that. And at the same time, he understands the political force that was unleashed by the reversal of the Dobbs decision and reversal of Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision. And it is one of the political factors that has to occupy his campaign. There's not much they can do about it now except for try to make him appear to be a middle ground between the far right that wants to ban abortion completely and the Democrats who want to keep abortion protections in place that are there now and also expand them back to at least where Roe stood.
Josh, what do you think about how this is being talked about in the presidential race on both sides?
Well, I think that I agree with Jonathan. I think you've got sort of a classic straddle going on in the Trump campaign where they're continuing to try to make their pitch to the religious conservatives, to the evangelicals, as you note, Stephanie. At the same time, they are very much concerned about this gender gap. Is a big problem. A lot of people, including a lot of Republicans, think that this is what cost Trump the 2020 election. And I think he has that in his mind. He knows he can't give up on one side of the ledger, but at the same time, he has that lurking in the back of his mind that he doesn't want to see a replay of 2020. And then on the Biden campaign side, I've been struck by the rather complete embrace of this issue by them. I was at an event over the weekend with both the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and also the vice president herself were at, and they were really stressing the degree to which they consider the Supreme Court responsible for this. And the second gentleman was even talking about Supreme Court reform, which is interesting because that's a little bit off script for the Biden administration. It's something the president himself has never endorsed, but it remains very popular with liberal voters. So they are definitely swinging at this particular pitch as hard as they can in the Biden campaign.
Barr, Biden's campaign is now saying things like IVF and birth control could be next. What are you most concerned this court could go after next?
Yeah, I think, Stephanie, any kind of right that is built on the concept of substantive due process is at issue here. If you think about that Dobbs opinion, you may remember that the majority included language like, this is very narrow. We're only talking about abortion here. Don't try to extend this to other things. But Clarence Thomas in his concurrence said, oh, yes, it is. The basis of Roe was substantive due process. And if we find no textual support for that, that means there's also no textual support for other rights, including contraception, gay sex, which had been upheld in a case previously based on substantive due process, interracial marriage. All of those things go to this idea that there is a fundamental right to privacy and self-determination, even though those precise words are not in the Constitution. And so if Dobbs can overturn Roe, then they can absolutely overturn all of those other rights as well.
Josh, some Americans hear these concerns about a national abortion ban or a crackdown on birth control, and they think these are just politicians being dramatic. This could never happen. You cover the court closely. How do you see these concerns? Are they legit?
Well, I mean, we already see these sorts of cases coming to the court, Stephanie. We already had an abortion pill case at the court this year, which was basically turned away on what were fundamentally kind of procedural and standing grounds. We have another case that's still pending on the issue of access to emergency abortions in emergency rooms across the country. So as Barbara said at the outset, these issues are not going away, and we'll see. So far, Supreme Court has tried to sort of tread, I think, the center line on this in the wake of the Dobbs decision, perhaps chagrined a little bit by some of the backlash they received, and they may be trying to moderate themselves. But how long that sticks for, and whether it sticks in every single abortion case they get, I think, is really an open question, because none of them is publicly repudiating the decision that they rendered 2 years ago, even if they might be trying to tack one way or the other at this particular moment.
Josh, we're also awaiting another big decision from the court about abortion. This time, it's a case out of Idaho about emergency care. Can you explain this to us?
So, yeah, this has to do with the federal law that basically governs what kind of services have to be provided to you in an emergency room. It stems from situations a couple decades ago where people with insurance would show up at private hospitals and be turned away, even though they were deathly ill because they didn't have the correct kind of insurance. And there was a law passed at that time that basically said, if your hospital takes Medicare or serves Medicare patients, you have to provide emergency care to anybody that comes through the door. And the situation that has developed in Idaho and is developing in other states is a question of what happens if the state has implemented a rather strict ban on abortion and you show up in an emergency room and you need an emergency abortion. It does happen sometimes people are going into sepsis, their life might be in danger. But a more common situation is that they're having some kind of problem that is going to cause them to lose the pregnancy eventually, and could potentially, if not treated, result in them losing the ability to have children in the future. And so you have hospitals now that basically, and doctors that won't provide that sort of care anymore. So you have a basic classic clash here between the federal law and the state law that in this case is trying to outlaw abortion. And that's what we're looking for the justices to resolve, perhaps by the end of this week.
In Idaho, a state that already has a shortage of hospitals and maternal care. Barb, there's some other big legal news tonight, completely unrelated. WikiLeaks founder, a name we know well, Julian Assange, has reached a plea deal with the U.S., and he is now a free man. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, it's actually really a fascinating development. You may recall that he was charged and has been awaiting extradition out where he is in England for about 5 years now. And even before that, he was in the Ecuadorian embassy in sort of self-exile for 7 years. So he's sort of been locked away for 12 years. It appears that a plea agreement has been reached where he will enter a guilty plea to conspiracy with Chelsea Manning to violate the Espionage Act by coercing, cajoling, working together with her to get classified national security information and disseminate that to the public. And one really interesting fact about all of this, Stephanie, is that he's going to enter this plea apparently in the Northern Mariana Islands. And the prosecution has asked that the plea and the sentencing all occur on the same day. It's expected that the sentence will be time served and that it's occurring in the Northern Mariana Islands because that is the court location nearest to his home country of Australia, to which he is expected to return.
Donald Trump has spent months and months spreading lies about President Biden's cognitive ability. And then out of the blue, he's now saying that Biden is a worthy debater who he does not underestimate. What exactly is going on here?
Well, his advisors finally got through to him and told him that the worst thing you can do in any debate is to raise expectations. Political debates and presidential debates are all about expectations. It's not judged forensically like some college debate where you score points. It's really about what you expect and how you perform against expectations. The interesting thing about this debate, as I was thinking about it tonight, that it's really less a debate than it is a competency test. I mean, there's nothing about either one of these candidates that we're going to learn that we didn't know already. It's not like they're going to put forward a policy position that they're either suggesting or that they've supported in the past that's going to move the dial in any way. But people are not tuning in to find out what Biden's policy is and what Trump's policy is. They're tuning in to see who is capable of doing the job still, because everybody has questions about their competency, including the candidates themselves about each other. So the question is, who is really up to the job? That's the main question that'll be on the stage.
Senator, what do you think we're in for Thursday night?
I think we're in for a very aggressive Joe Biden. I think he's going to come out. He wouldn't be doing the debate this early if he didn't figure he needed to do it. And so I think you're going to see him come out. He's going to be very aggressive, attacking the former president on abortion. He's going to talk about his failed economic record, the mess he had to clean up. And Donald Trump's going to ramble around and not really make a coherent statement. And so low expectations for the president. If the president performs, if Biden performs, it'll be a huge win for Biden. Democrats will breathe a sigh of relief that, we live to fight another day. And I think that it will change, actually will move poll numbers. This is a huge debate.
You think it's a good idea? You think it's a good idea for President Biden, this debate?
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea because in part, we've now bypassed the Presidential Commission on Debates.
Yes.
And so we can talk about it. There's another norm that's gone by the wayside, but it allowed the president to set the rules. And let me tell you, the rules benefit Joe Biden.
What do you think, Mark?
I think by far it was the smartest strategic decision of the entire campaign. Listen, they had three options. One was to not debate at all. That's a non-starter. They would lose the election if they didn't debate. The other was to do what you would normally do, which is to just put it off, let Trump dominate the debate and say anytime, anywhere, any place up until September. Then you finally fold and say, OK, we'll do it. And it's all on Trump's terms by taking the initiative and throwing down the line. First of all, they showed confidence, which is the most important thing that Biden's got to do. His greatest problem is perception of weakness. So by doing that, he looks more confident. He takes control of the agenda. He takes control of the rules of the debate. And he just looks strong and confident by doing it. So I think it's a really smart thing to do. Now, it's also very high risk, but I think it's a risk that was well worth taking. And as Heidi said, I think there's enormous upside to this. But it's, listen, it's a high wire act and there's no net.
All right, quickly, yes or no, or matter of time. Do you think Donald Trump's showing up Thursday night?
Yes.
Mark?
Yeah, I think he's got to, because otherwise it shows weakness. And that's the one thing that Donald Trump can't do. And by the way, the worst thing it would do is it would create a perception of him as a loser and being afraid of Joe Biden. Again, he can't tolerate that.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.